87 went to Hawaii to see him retire, thinking, oh, what a great time. This is it. This is the pinnacle of his career. He's going to fade away like a lot of us military guys do. And next thing I know, he calls me. He's like, well, I'm going for my doctorate, and I'm going to write a book. And I'm like, okay, yeah, he's not going to write a book. And next thing you know, he published it. And he was like, I want you to moderate one of the talks when I come home. So we organized it here. I mean, this place has a lot of meaning to me. It's beautiful. It's got to be one of the most beautiful buildings in Fredonia. And so here we are tonight, moderating I'm going to be moderating his career throughout his time in the Navy. But he really could not have done this alone. And he didn't do it alone. You have Stephanie. Where is Stephanie? So when you're in the Navy and you have the career that Bob did, it's just not Bob. It's also Stephanie, the kids. They all have to buy into it. Because I've seen commanders with spouses and families who don't, and they usually don't make it. And Stephanie, her hard work, her devotion, I mean, Bob was gone probably out of the 28 years, 10 of them. Where in most of it, there wasn't even any contact, not even email or cell phone. I can't imagine that as a spouse. You know, where us, when we would go, yeah, you're with your buddies. You know, you might be in a miserable place, you might be absolutely doing something awful, but you're with your buds, so you know what you're doing. But for a spouse, that's all you probably lay in bed at times thinking about and dwelling about. So Stephanie, God bless you for doing that. All right. So, well, I'd like to start off the program and just say, you know, Bob, we're just thrilled by the launch of your book, Beyond the Sea, Leading with Love, from the nuclear Navy to the White House and through healthcare. All right, it was just published on June 25th of this year. And I have the honor of talking with one of my best friends, Bob Ronsko, about the book. He's had a remarkable 28-year career in the Navy. He was a fast attack sub-commander. He was a Commodore leading the world's largest, or the U.S. largest fleet of submarines in Hawaii. And probably one of the most notable was, he carried the nuclear football for George W. Bush, who gave him the name and coined the phrase Navy Bob. And so he currently is the adjunct professor at the University of Central Florida, the School of Health Management and Informatics. So I had to look at that one. With the launch of his first book, Beyond the Sea, he is on a mission to promote leading with love to foster positive cultures and well-being globally. I'll be moderating this with Bob, and we will start by learning more about the motivation of the reasoning behind this book. And then after, we will open it up for questions from the audience. All right. So, well, let's dive in. So, Bob, congratulations on this book, Beyond the Sea, Leading with Love. Please just talk to us, the readers of this book, the motivation behind this.
So thank you, Joey. Love you. And I first want to say, as you did, I want to thank the 1891 Opera House, Rick, Dan, and Hannah. Thank you so much for supporting this wonderful event. I mean, this place is just iconic. I also want to thank the organization committee, Debbie Hill, Mary Nalepa, Bev Sutton, and of course, Joe Gugino. And as Joey mentioned, this November, I'm going to be married to Stephanie for 32 years. And she's the rock of our family, and just, I love her. But last but not least, I want to thank the people, specifically from Dunkirk and Fredonia in Western New York, the teachers, the classmates, the friends. This is why I wrote the book. I started this journey where I had a hypothesis where if you look at the nuclear Navy, everyone goes to the same schools, both tactical leadership. We operate the same equipment. We operate on the same procedures. It couldn't be more formal in the nuclear Navy. And yet, there was such a profound difference in performance. We've had some submarines do remarkable things, and some submarines running into seamounts and hitting Japanese fishing boats. And so I rode almost every single submarine in the fleet. And my theory was it was leadership and culture. And yet, when I went to the leadership schools, it wasn't taught. They had some leadership. It was a bumper sticker leadership course like we experience today. Then I went into healthcare, and that's where the beyond the sea. And it was almost exact. You go on one unit, it would be magical, and then you go on another unit, it would be a disaster. So then I got my doctorate, and I studied leadership, and I teach at UCF leadership operations and quality at UCF, as Joey mentioned. And so by writing this book, I didn't want this to be just telling submarine stories or carrying nuclear codes. There's so many other people that have done that. I really want to make this world a better place to really spread the word leading with love. And the reason why I'm here is because you all have your fingerprints in this. As I reflected back and where did I learn this? It was you. It was the teachers. It was the friends. It was the classmates. It was this community. And I couldn't be more grateful for all of you for being here. So I'm going to give you some background on why leading with love is so profound and how I came up with this. And, you know, I always get, you know, how is it a commanding officer, a guy who carried the nuclear codes, ready to go to war with China or Russia, how can he lead with love? You know, but it is the most profound leadership style. There are no downsides with leading with love. All outcomes will exceed beyond expectations. You'll become a legendary leader, you'll build a legendary culture, and you will lead a good life. So this presentation is going to take you through this journey, chronological journey, to tell you and show you how this happens.
All right, well, the book opens up with chapter 1, Don't Mess with Texas. All right, this has got to be one of my favorite stories that Bob tells, and I absolutely love this story. But could you share your experience that day and how this defined leading with love for you? So
I would like all of you to imagine that you're a commanding officer on board a fast attack Virginia-class submarine behind enemy lines at periscope depth, a stone throws away from the most capable adversary submarine in the world. And they're about to conduct an event where they launch a missile. And it's so important that we're there to capture this. And there's other combatants in the area. And so tensions were really high. They had no idea we were there. This was no movie, this was for real. And as we were watching this event to unfold, I heard something as the commanding officer of this new signal coming out of this sophisticated radar listening audible signal. And I directed the officer of the deck, who is in control of the periscopes that were focused on that area, the area of interest. I tell him to do a safety sweep, which means take the submarine scopes around. And as he starts rotating around, we see this. I gulped, and I immediately yelled, "Down scope!" And as the scope was coming down, we're panning up. You can see the pilots in the cockpit. You could read the numbers on their tail. I immediately got the chill up my spine. And as the commanding officer, I couldn't show this to the crew. I had 30 people looking at me, the old man, the most experienced person on board. Captain, what do we do? I turned to my second in command, Gary Montalvo, and I just look at him and I shake my head. I said, "Gary, this isn't good." What was at stake is that we were in their backyard. They could have easily closed off areas. They could have forced us to surface either with depth charges or running at us to collide with us so that they can get pictures of us on USA Today to embarrass us for us being there. And what was also at stake is if you take the cost of this $2 billion nuclear submarine and add on the cost of the maintenance, the crew, and the cycles, this one decision to leave and not get this for taxpayers was about $100 million. And I needed to make this decision right now. And I thought there was a good chance they had us. So we waited for a little while to see if That plane came back around. Our sensitive sonar could detect if he flew back over. He didn't. And about 3 minutes later, I directed the officer of the deck. I said, raise the scope, and then I directed my operations officer in the next room. I said, report if you have any indication of counter detection, but she had more of a sophisticated listening and surveillance platform. As soon as the scope was raised, he said, con radio, indication of that plane by name detected an adversary submarine. And he says, firecracker, 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 which was our code word that we were counter detected. I knew what was at stake. I knew that we needed to get out of there for the safety of the crew. So out of my mouth, I was about to announce, left hard rudder, make your depth 400 feet, all ahead standard. This is the captain. I have the con. We're boarding this mission. Then out of my right side of peripheral vision, I see my XO, Gary. Comes up in front of me, and he puts his hand right in my face as I'm opening my mouth. And once I made this decision, there was no turning back. He says, Captain, Captain, really loud. He says, and you can read it in the book, I'm not going to announce it here. He says, let's stick around and see if they have us. Why did he do that? Because if he was wrong, every second we waited could have made it that much worse, more severe. His judgment would have been in question, and yet he still spoke up. And then shortly after that, someone else said, something doesn't make sense. Seconds turned into minutes, minutes turned into hours, and it wasn't us. That decision was crucial. It was a $100 million decision. And what was the reason he did that? And there's the only way I can come up with. It was love. So that's what made me write this book. That reflecting back, I need to tell the world of love is one of the greatest leadership styles out there. So that is a story of don't mess with Texas.
I love that story. That's a lot of pressure when you have a $2 billion sub and a crew and everything is riding on you. So good for you. In your book, you've referenced some of your first memories of some key players in your life who shaped your leadership philosophy in leading with love. Can you talk about some of those?
So absolutely, Joey. And so, like I said, as I started to write these stories and figuring out where did I learn leading with love, I came back to the community, but it started with my father. And if you look here, that's my father on the left in 1944. That was him hugging that dog. And shortly thereafter, that picture was taken. His mother and his sister died while she was giving childbirth. And my father was placed into an orphanage because my grandfather couldn't take care of him because he grew up on a farm. So for about 8 years on Route 60, he was in that orphanage. And so I remember when he had a child of his own, me, in 1969, he used to hug me like that dog. And so why he was so loving was because there was such a vacuum that his family was taken away. So then when he had a family of his own, he treated me like gold. And so in 1998, when I was going to my second command, and if you read in the book, my first command was underneath a toxic leader. I wasn't sure if I was going to continue in the Navy, but I did. And shortly thereafter, when I was going to my second submarine, Stephanie was, like I said, she was incredible support, but we were about to deploy for 6 to 8 months on a submarine. So I knew that I needed to find a family. And so my orders were being changed like 3 or 4 times. And I'll never forget, about 2 months going to my second command, I get a tap on my shoulder in Groton, Connecticut at one of the schools. And it was the director of SOAC. It was Submarine Officer Advanced Course. He says, Lieutenant Ronska, can I talk to you outside? I says, absolutely. and he says, I have some bad news. He says, your father died by suicide this morning. And I immediately looked for a DeLorean time machine. I was pinching myself to see if this was a bad dream. And I came home for the funeral. It was the worst day of my life. And so shortly thereafter, I went back to Sobek, or the advanced course right before I was going to my second submarine. And I didn't know if I was going to continue in the Navy, because I knew that that vacuum that my father experienced when he lost his family, that's the same vacuum that I was feeling. And so I was in the bathroom, the head, and again, I was contemplating not continuing. And when I was in the head, 2 officers came in, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget their voice, how they sounded. And he said to the other officer, they were ignoring me, I was all the way in the end, and he said, have you heard what happened to the prospective navigator on the Asheville? And the other officer said, no, what happened? He said he broke his leg playing football. And he said, I would do anything to go work for that captain. His name is Captain Grooms. He was my XO on Pasadena. So I ask you this. When someone said they would do anything to work for a leader again, what is the attribute of that leader? They care. They love you. They take care of you. So I immediately called the detailer, the person placing me. I said, I need to go to that ship. I need to get to that ship with Captain Grooms. And I did. And that is where I learned from this man, his name is Captain Grooms, he's in the book, that yes, you too can lead with love in a work environment. And I won't go into details, but he's the one that showed me that leading with love can be done in the workplace.
Nice, very nice. What are some other moments in your life outside of the submarine world where you experienced and observed some examples of leading with love?
So, leading with love, like I said, there's no downsides. They're beyond expectations. Your results will go out through the roof. For example, the Asheville, we were the battle E-boat, which was the #1 ship in the squadron. And then I went to my second submarine, which was the USS La Jolla. And the USS La Jolla was a special ship. It had a dry dock shelter on the back. Basically, it allowed the little James Bond SEAL delivery unit to be put inside. You'd get underway from Pearl Harbor, where we were stationed, with SEALs on board. You'd go to some undisclosed location, and there was only a handful of people with curtains around the plots where no one knew where we were at or what we were doing, because it was so classified. And we deployed with SEAL Delivery Team 1 when I was an XO. At the same time, when we were deploying with SEAL Delivery Team 1, have you ever heard of the movie Lone Survivor? So Lone Survivor, Lieutenant Murphy, he took 3 other people behind enemy lines, and all of a sudden they got counter-detected by goat herders, and next thing you know, they were surrounded by, enemy fire beyond belief. They were in this valley. And in the movie, it really shows that what this Michael Murphy did. He went above. He knew he was going to die. He needed to get communications. He went up on this ridge knowing he was going to die to save his fellow SEALs, and he did. And that's the title of the Lone Survivor. And if you look at the SEAL teams, they're one of the most successful organizations that has ever existed. And I saw this culture. And Michael Murphy, which he's right here on the right, on the left, and that's the lone survivor on the right, Marcus Luttrell. And if you look at the SEALs, they're one of the most successful organizations that have ever existed. I saw them. I worked with them. There was no other way to explain it but other than love. And love, the definition of love is sacrificially of giving yourself for the benefit of others. And Michael Murphy sacrificially gave his life for his team members. There is no other way to explain love. And then fast forward, here's me with President Bush posthumously giving the Medal of Honor to Michael Murphy's parents in the East Wing And do you know who was in the audience? It was a lone survivor. And there wasn't a dry eye in the East Room. You could feel the love. And so that's where I found it wasn't the submarine community, it was in other communities that you can lead with love.
Nice. All right, well, let's talk about hot sauce. All right, what does hot sauce, being from Buffalo, what does hot sauce have to do with leadership lessons while you were commanding a nuclear submarine?
So this is where I had the opportunity to take command. And I took over the USS Texas in July. And again, never had command, didn't have leadership, and I didn't know how it was going to turn out. But let me tell you what I was first tasked to do. This is a second Virginia-class submarine, and we were tasked to take this second ship of its class, brand new, right out of the shipyard, and take this ship underneath the North Pole to certify this class for Arctic operations. And by taking this underneath the North Pole, there are some dangers. This is a new, completely re-engineered engineering plan. And when you go underneath the North Pole, the water is 28 degrees. And there was someone else I talked to that was at the North Pole. And it's all the condensation that is in the air comes out in these random droplets. And when you have a new engineering plant, these droplets will then go on these cabinets with microprocessors that are controlling the reactor. And if it could have been a high probability that that drop could have dropped on one of these microprocessors and scrammed the reactor. And there were days when we would travel the ice where it was so thick that we couldn't surface. And if you can't surface and you lose the reactor, and you can't use your emergency diesel generator because you can't surface, you die. Then I get reports that there were 2 adversary submarines coming out to try to find this new Virginia-class submarine. And they said, Captain, don't worry about it. We're going to route you through the Denmark Strait. And I said, isn't the Denmark Strait where there's the iceberg capital of the world? Isn't that the same place that sank the Titanic? And I says, yes. And I says, and it was a rhetorical question. I said, so how do you find icebergs at 28-degree water that don't melt and they don't make noise and they're just basically these floating islands? And he says, well, you can use active sonar. And I said, you know who likes active sonar? The people that are coming out to find me. So he says, basically, yeah, good question, Captain, figure it out, right? But that was not my biggest concern. It wasn't the ice, it wasn't the icebergs, it wasn't the adversary submarines. My biggest concern was the culture of the crew. It was like every day, much greater than what I ever experienced was playing whack-a-mole. Every day, a new problem would rise, some really bad and some just minor. But it wasn't if, it was when. I didn't know where these occurrences were going to happen. And so I knew the greatest threat of our safety of going underneath the North Pole was the culture of the crew. We almost failed a major engineering exam before I went there, a nuclear engineering exam. We had the lowest retention, lowest ranking of the squadron before I got there. And we were supposed to get under the ice in September. My Commodore is poking me in the chest and saying, you need to get this ship underneath the ice by September 20th, or you're not going, and this is going to be a disgrace to the submarine force, and your ship is so messed up. So what did I do? I was tired of playing whack-a-mole. I dug into my toolbox of leading with love from other great leaders, and I mustered the crew topside. And I told the Cobb, muster the crew topside, and as soon as I see them going up, I had them muster just like you're looking at me here today. Didn't know what I was going to say. And I said, men, I love you, I care for you. Here's a sheet with your name at the top. I just want to take 5 seconds of your time to put your name at the top to make sure we have 100% accountability. And all I want you to do is put 1, 2, 3. Whatever your concerns are, I don't know, whatever they may be, but I need to know because I love you and I care for you. And I went back down to my stateroom. And then about an hour later, I got a stack like this of issues that I had no idea that were occurring. And one of the issues of many, I will just tell you, there wasn't enough computers on board the submarine. And this new Virginia-class submarine, it would look like a Star Trek bridge. Everything operated off of computers. And what that entailed was 2 hours of every sailor's time was wasted that they couldn't be with their family members, that they'd have to stay late because there wasn't sufficient number of computers. It wasn't like we couldn't afford it. We were a $2 billion submarine. It's just the apathy was incredible. So I immediately got new computers that day from other ships in the squadron, and I mustered the crew back topside. And as they're standing in front of me about 2 hours later, I said to the crew, I am so sorry. I love you, I care for you. This will never happen again. I got new computers, and I so much appreciate you telling me what your problems are. And that was the spark. That was the spark of the culture change. In about a 3-month period, the whack-a-mole game stopped. And our culture went from, they were no longer fearful of making a mistake because they were going to get in trouble. They were fearful of making a mistake because they cared for the other crew members and the ship. And the reason why we were playing whack-a-mole is because they didn't care for the ship. And the reason they didn't care for the ship is because the ship didn't care for them. And when I did that simple thing where they made them feel valued, where it provided transparency, and it gave them this muscle memory to speak up, that is what had changed. And approximately a year and a half later, this is us, was 2 months later we were at the North Pole, but a year and a half later, we were ranked the best ship out of 10 with a rigorous objective analysis to be the best submarine out of 10. We had the highest retention in the Pacific Fleet for 2 consecutive years in a row. And that engineering exam, it was called an ORS, it's called an Operational Reactor Safeguards Exam. It's one of the most rigorous nuclear exams that ever exists. That's why we haven't had a reactor accident. We scored the highest grade possible that we almost failed a year and a half ago. And it wasn't because I was this technical guru. I wasn't the best tactician. All I did was lead with love. And I will tell you, there is no doubt in my mind that leading with love has beyond expectations outcomes. You'll build a legendary leader, and you'll build a legendary outcome. That is what leading with love does, and that's why I'm really passionate about this book. I have the practical experience to be able to share this with the world, and I want to make this world a better place. So as I continued the crew top 3 until I left, I continued making the crew feel valued, getting their input. Do you know what the #1 concern was of the crew? There was only one on the last one that I did. There wasn't sufficient variety of hot sauce on the crew's mess. And I knew that when I saw that, that was really the litmus test, that was the magic culture that really can be embedded in any industry, in any ship, or any organization. And love is universal, and there's no doubt that love was the reason why we were so successful.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Bob. Yeah, I'm actually a Texas Pete for my scrambled eggs and Frank's Red Hot with chicken wings. So those are my 2 favorite. But my guess was, when he mentioned that the other day, was going to be the ice cream machine. The ice cream machine's always broken, or the dog, I think they call it. But, all right, so in your book, you define success as the good life, all right? And in there, you state, achieving a good life is so simple. We all have the ability to do it. Can you expand on that and pull from the movie that you got that from?
Absolutely, Joey. And so not only does leading with love have beyond expectations outcomes, it provides you to become a legendary leader, and it provides a legendary culture. But it also leads to a good life. And so where did I come across this is that when I was getting underway as a captain of the Texas, I saw this book called The Good Life by Charles Colson. It was on a New York Times best-selling list. And I said, I need to know what the good life is. Because being underwater for 8 years, not consecutively, I started to question, what am I doing with my life? Sure, I was here providing credible assets and national security, but I started having this doubt, am I leading a good life? And so I started reading this book, and one of the chapters talked about the movie Saving Private Ryan. And when Saving Private Ryan was saved in the movie, Tom Hanks, Captain Murphy at the time, he looked him in the eye and said, our sacrifices for you, he says, don't squander this. He says, you know, we are no longer going to feel the sun on our face, belly laugh, the greatness of life. We sacrifice this for you. So you don't squander this. You go out and do good things for others. So now when Captain Murphy, or Private Ryan, was standing in front of the grave of Captain Murphy, he mumbles underneath his breath and he says, I hope I exceeded your expectations. Which means I hope I did enough good things to pay forward all the good things that you did for me so that I can lead a good life. And you see his family, wonderful family in the background. And then he turns to his wife, and you know what he says to his wife? He says, am I a good man? Which means, did I do enough good things in this world to be a good person? So that really stuck out to me. And it really, it made me feel like, what am I doing in my life? When we were born, your stopwatch starts. And there's only one thing that can stop it, is when you die. No one has ever not died. And no one will tell you, like, you should do this or that. And no one tells you what the good life is. And it's not about money. It's not about what car you drive. It's about how much good you can do for others.
Excellent. All right, and also an alma mater of yours, Mr. Rogers. You want to?
Yes, and so then I had the just feeling like, what am I doing? And so, Mr. Rogers, I went to Rollins College to get my doctorate degree. And at Rollins College, Mr. Rogers was a student. He graduated from Rollins College. He's also from Pittsburgh, not too far from here. And when Mr. Rogers died, he had a note in his wallet. And that note in his wallet said, life is for service. And Mr. Rogers says this famous quote. He says, love and success, always in that order. It's that simple and that difficult. And so what does that mean? I see this throughout so many other industries where leaders, they put productivity first and they put people second. And that is not the recipe for success. If you put people first, like I did on Texas, the Texas will take care of the ship will take care of the mission. And it happens in any industry, even healthcare. I see healthcare leaders today, they're so worried about productivity. And if they would just take care of the nurses or staff first, the staff will take care of the patients will take care of the productivity. And so Mr. Rogers is so brilliant in my mind. And if you already see him, he's so happy. He's happy. And he is the definition of leading a good life. And so where I came about this is that leading with love, there are no downsides, like I said. And if you look at the outcomes, I'll reiterate it. That one decision for Gary, leading with love, saved the taxpayers $100 million, not to mention 2 consecutive years in a row of retention, highest retention. The price tag is incredible. We became a legendary leader. That culture was legendary because everyone wanted to come there. But I'll share the last thing that is the most profound impact of leading with love. When I was leading with love on the ship, I got to know everybody. and I got to know their families. It was authentic relationships. And one of the people that I got to know is Petty Officer Mankins. Petty Officer Mankins was there for about a year until I transferred. And Petty Officer Mankins and Amber were wonderful. So 4 years went by. He was still on the Texas. I went to Squadron 7 as the Commodore, not in their same squadron, and I see him out running. And I said, Petty Officer Mankins, is that you? And he says, Captain Ronska? And it was like yesterday. He says, so great to see you. I said, how's Amber? And this is 4 years. It was like yesterday. And he was great. He says, do you mind if I come to your office later today? I said, absolutely. He comes to my office. He says, listen, he says, I was supposed to leave. My orders have me leaving in October of this year to go to prototype. It's a high nuclear visibility job. And I'm all on board of going in October. And Amber and I have been trying to get pregnant for 3 years, and we can't. And we know that it's due to an infertility treatment problem, or infertility. And he says, all we want in this life is to have a child. That's all we want. And he says, we finally, at Tripler Hospital, we got an appointment after waiting on the waiting list for 3 years, and our first appointment is this July. We're so excited. And I almost stood up and hugged him. He goes, there's one problem. He goes, before I left on my 6-month deployment, everyone knew what was at stake, that our first appointment was in July. And I was leaving in October, and I was okay with that because it would give me July, August, September, October. We'd be okay with that if it didn't work. I come back 2 weeks ago from deployment in April, and he says, there's orders on the board. Directed me to report to Charleston in June. He says, my heart sank. Amber started to cry because all we wanted to do is have a child. And he says, I went to my commanding officer, my XO, my engineer, my Commodore, and no one is helping me for 2 weeks. And he says, when I called the person placing me and writing these orders, the detailer, he says, and starts yelling at me and says, stop having people call me. They're called orders for a reason. Suck it up, Buttercup, and try harder. And he was treating him like an object and not like a person. So I immediately picked up the phone and I said, listen, I go, this is not how we treat our family members in the Navy. And I says, you're going to change these orders back to October by Friday, and it was a Monday. I said, if you don't, I'm going to call the 4-star admiral myself in charge of naval reactors, and I'm going to tell him how you're treating our people. In October, he calls me from the airport, and he tells me that his wife is pregnant. And I lost track. As I'm writing this book, as I'm reflecting back, I reach out to Petty Officer Mankins, and he sends me this picture. He sends me this picture, and he sends me a picture of his daughter, Sweet Caroline. And so I just saw him 2 weeks ago after 8 years. And he gives me a picture of his Sweet Caroline. He says, you and God are the only reasons why my Sweet Caroline is here. And the euphoric feeling I had, I started to cry. And there's no price tag or anything I could have done or purchased that could even compared to feeling this euphoric feeling of leading a good life. So as Mr. Rogers said, if you want to lead a good life, you do good things. And by doing good things for others, the feeling that you will have will be undeniable. And this all comes about by leading with love. He would have never came to me if I didn't lead with love and gave him his problems. So then I started to think, have you all seen the movie, of course, It's a Wonderful Life? So this is where I reflected back to you all. I believe Fredonia, Dunkirk, Western New York is Bedford Falls. And I look back at the teachers, the classmates, and the friends that we have, is that we are leading a good life because we do so many great things for other people. And so one of the things that I talk about is, I was on the Dan Palmer show. And I told Dan, I said, Dan, I go, if you were not here and you didn't spread the joy that you do with the player of the day, How many of you have experienced the player of the day? I remember Bogardus coming up to me and said, "Congratulations," even when I got pinned by someone else. "I heard you were the player of the day." But the confidence that Dan has done with the simple thing of recognizing people and doing good for others makes him a legendary person. And just like George Bailey, he's the richest man in town. Why was he the richest man in town? It's because he did so many great things for other people. And that is what a wonderful life is. And that's where I found it here. This book is so much more than telling submarine stories, carrying the nuclear codes. It is here to make this world a better place by sharing how leading with love and how I found it here. And it was no doubt, this is where I learned it. From all the teachers sitting in the front row, and I'm just going to go Catalano, Bogardus, on and on. It's just, Salisbury I saw yesterday. It was just incredible. And I think Zirkel's here. I would have never got through nuclear power school if it wasn't for Zirkel. And and it was because of love. And it was John, same thing. Just, I wouldn't have come in the classmates here. I see Joe Trippi and all the other DHS 87 classmates. John Uzaki. I couldn't have done this without you. And your fingerprints of leading with love is all over this book. And that's where I want to make this world a better place, to really show the magical things that you did, like Bedford Falls, George Bailey. You are responsible for my success. And if you didn't lead with love or care, I would have never have been as successful. I would have gotten counter-detected. Even if I don't even know, without, I would have got through nuclear power school if I wasn't for you, so I would have never been there. But as I reflect back, and who are some of the richest people in this world? And it's not based on money. Like Potter was rich, but was he rich? No, he was a miserable man. He wasn't rich. When he dies, he's not going to take that with him. So who are some of the richest people that I came across in Dunkirk, Fredonia? Here they are. Coach Gibbons, he's in the book. Muffin is here. He had such a profound impact on me, and I quote him in the book. He talks about getting better or get worse. You don't stay the same. And that had nothing to do with how fast you can run or what plays you run. He was talking about you, and he cared for you in life. We have Principal Gugino. Never forget Joe's dad. He was always so caring and loving. And every time I saw him, he was just laughing, smiling, and just so loving. And he had a huge influence on me as well. Principal Mancuso never had a child. He treated every single student as a child. You could feel that. Principal Price, Gene is a classmate. He was my school 7 principal. Judge Prince, David, his son, is here with his son. He, as a judge, he did care immensely for our community and us growing up. Coach Stu Miller, I don't even have to say, Coach Stu Miller was always such a shiny, bright light. He always loved you, and he wanted to see you succeed. And last but not least, Coach Uzaki, John and his mother are here with his son. And so with the girls' basketball team, you could tell he loved Dunkirk more than anything. And, and it just, this is the love, and this is the George Bailey of our community. And so leading with love, I'll just reiterate this, there is no downsides. Leading with love and compassion, all outcomes will exceed beyond expectations. You will become a legendary leader. Just like these people, they're legendary. Everyone knows who they are. And why? Because they led with love. You will build a legendary culture, and you will lead a good life. I guarantee you all of these people are looking down on us right now and smiling at us. and they are the richest people in this room. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for the support. I love you all, and I hope you enjoy the book. Thank you.
All right. Fantastic. We're going to open it up for some questions from the audience. I think Julie is going to grab the microphone from me. But as she's coming down here, one quick story. I'll never forget being in trigonometry class with Mr. Zirkle and Bob. And so he would give us problems to do, and he'd say, and you're like, okay, Bob, put your problem number 1 on that board, and he would assign all boards. This is when they had chalkboards. And so we're up there for like 10 minutes, scribbling out this question, and he's looking at Bob's, the way he does. That's interesting. And Bob would be like, well, is it right? If you want to do it wrong, and they would just go back and forth with very respectful banter, because we were afraid of our teachers back then. And so it was absolutely hilarious. Just, I'm so glad you guys could make it. But, okay, here we go. Open for questions.
If you guys want to just raise your hand if you have questions.
I thought the rank of Commodore was only used in wartime.
So I was a captain, retired in '06, but they kept the title, not the rank, to be a Commodore Squadron 7. So if you look at all the submarine commanders, they're dubbed Commodores. So they still kept the title, but you're right, it's only a title or a rank in a wartime situation. So if you look at it, if you Google Commodore Squadron 1, 7, 5, 6, they're dubbed as Commodores. So, but great question. And one of the claim to fame is that in Squadron 7, where I was the Commodore, my office was the same office of Admiral Kimmel. Admiral Kimmel was the fleet commander over the entire fleet when Pearl Harbor happened. And if you watch the movie Midway, Tora Tora Tora, there was a famous scene where a stray 50 or 60 caliber machine gun bullet came through, ricocheted off, and it hit him, and he looked to the person next to him and says, "I wish it would have killed me because it would have been more merciful." And that same window that he overlooked of the actually attack was my office as Commodore Squadron 7. So going back there and being in that history was just amazing. So yes, my title was Commodore, but my actual rank was a captain.
You guys don't need to be shy.
Do you have a TikTok account?
TikTok, no.
The reason I ask is, why write a book in this day and age when most people can't really concentrate longer than 30 seconds? That's all.
That's why I got Audible. So I will tell you though, writing this book, it really did wonders for me, because I started this book about 4 years ago, and I didn't know where the title wasn't Leading with Love. I didn't come up with that. But this iterative process of really determining where this actually came from and why this phenomena existed was invaluable to me. And so this process of writing a book, it was hard, but it really helped me figure out why this is. And like I said, the reason why I wrote this book, if you look, there's so many leadership books, so many different submarine books out there, but I wanted to really pay it forward. That's what just like you, I don't want to have this book to be a book to be put on a shelf. And when I was going through the leadership courses in the Navy, and when I teach at UCF, there's really no great leadership example out there. And if you look at leadership, it's been studied since 400 BC. And there's just as many leadership books out there as there are leadership theories, as there are people studying leadership, and we still haven't cracked the code. If you Google the definition of leadership, it'll say, one who follows. And it's just that this is profound, that we're not talking about love. Love is very pronounced in the religious, right? We talk about love, it's studied all the time. But if you Google any research in the business world or in the organizations outside religion, it is not talked about. It's frowned upon about talking about love. This world needs love more than anything. And I'm not saying love is not where, it's cuddling and things like that. Love is like love as if you care for the people that you are working with. And that is the definition of love. And so my purpose of writing this book was not to just get a message out there or just to make me famous or to be able to, have a book. I really wanted to change this world. And by writing this book is just been incredible for me, because this is where my legacy, that I want to help change this world, not to benefit me, but to help others. So that's why I wrote the book. Thank you. Any questions about, sorry.
Quick question. When I grew up, along with some of these other folks, we were kind of taught that when the time came, we should serve our country in any way we could. I don't sense that's really happening today in the way parents are raising their kids, and I really get concerned about the ability for the military to recruit the kind of quality people that they need to get us to the level of defense that we need to be for our country. Your comments, please.
So great question, and I pondered. So I'm just going to give you data. In 2021, there was a McKinsey article that came out during the Great Resignation, and if you look at, especially in a hospital situation, but this was against all organizations, AdventHealth, the 10th largest hospital system in the country, spent additional $400 million during turnover. And so everyone was looking at turnover. And the number one reason during this research study was why people left their jobs. By far, the number one reason was they didn't feel valued. That was the reason why. And even when I'm teaching Masters of Healthcare Administration students at UCF, amongst their people that work in the healthcare, I asked the question, do you feel valued at work? And it was like everyone raised their hand about examples on how they don't feel valued. And I'll give you one example, is that one of the students talked about how they'd have to call the patients to schedule appointments. And when they called the patients, they would be recorded with an actual, like they're being recorded so they can audit to say if they do all the checklist of what they're supposed to say to the patient to make sure that it's great customer experience. And she says that there are sometimes I call the same patient and I know this patient, so I'm not going to say their name twice, or I'm not going to do these specific things because I know the patient. And the only time my boss has ever talked to me in the 6 months that I've been there is when I haven't followed the procedure correctly. And not once did that boss ever ask me how I am, where I'm from, where my family is. And I said, how does that make you feel? She says, it makes me feel like an object. I said, do you have a resume updated? She says, absolutely, I'm looking right now. And so that cued me in on why this is. And so if you look at the generation that we grew up in, like my father and all of you, we grew up in hard times. We were fortunate to have a job. And, we were happy to go home in our community. This generation, and I'm going to be frank, they're known as the participation trophy generation. And so if you look at how they were growing up, is that they were valued so much at home, and now they go into this work environment where it hasn't caught up to the family. And so that's why you're seeing people in this generation, I think, not joining the military as much. But my cue is this, is that this generation, if we don't change in our industry, we're not going to have the workforce that is necessary to tomorrow's future to support. If you look in healthcare alone, in 2030, there's going to be 17 more million people over the age of 65. We don't have enough healthcare workers today to support our next generation by 2030. And if we don't adjust and start caring for this workforce and leading with love, I think we're going to be even worse in where we are today. So I completely agree with you, this generation, but we need to adapt with this new generation. And they're not bad people. That's just the fact of life and how they grew up. So I hope that answers your question.
Can you share any stories about your time with W?
Yes. So if you read the book, there's about 3 chapters about President Bush. And when I got some of the endorsements, like from Dana Perino and Daniel Silva, his wife is Jamie Gengel, she's a correspondent for CNN. And the first thing they asked me was, you don't have any political stories in here. And I said, no, there's no political stories. And what it was is I really wanted to talk about President Bush and my own personal stories on how he treated his staff. That's all it was. It wasn't political, it wasn't decisions, it wasn't anything like that. And one of the stories that's not in the book that Stephanie said, I don't want you to put this in the book because it was personal. But when I was at Camp David during his 63rd birthday, I get an email from his father, Bush 41. And if you ever read anything from Bush 41, it's very eloquent. He's a prolific writer. It's just a work of art. And he sends me this email about this thick. And it's just like, son, we're so sorry. We're not there. Mother and I, we're just so proud of you. It just goes on and on and on. It's just something was just so well written. And at the end, it says, as Robin would say, we love you more than tongue-in-cheek could ever say. And he signs it. And I'm thinking, who is Robin? Who is Robin? I know Jeb. I know his brother Marvin. I know his sisters. Who is Robin? Never heard of Robin. If you Google, Robin was the sister that died when she was 3 years old and he was about 7. Here it is, his 63rd birthday, and they're still talking about Robin. That was the family that I experienced underneath President Bush and Mrs. Bush, and I really highlight that in the book. So I talk about, taking him to message traffic when the surge was happening and what he would say to me and how ecstatic he would be when I didn't tell him we would lose any soldiers and Marines. That weight of putting more soldiers and Marines in, I couldn't imagine that weight. And we were underneath the Texas sky, and it really showed that when we did lose somebody, he would take the message traffic and there was no one else there, and he would take it in and just change his demeanor for the day. I'm not saying what decision was right or wrong, but as a human being to have that weight and to not just blow it off in that decision, it was really authentic on how he cared for the troops. So, and one last example I'll give you of many is that I was on Air Force One, and a staff member, I was passing him by, we're ready to get off. And a staff member says, Mr. President, there's a last minute addition. There was a soldier that's pretty maimed. He got hit with an IED. Half of his, his head was deformed, no arms, and he's in a wheelchair, and I could see him underneath the wing. And he says, would you like to see this soldier? He wants to see you. And he immediately looks at him. He says, absolutely. And so I watched him walk down the stairs, and there was a senator, congressman, governor. He didn't acknowledge them. He immediately ran to that soldier in the wheelchair, and he picked him up, and he gave him a huge hug. And he sat there for 5 minutes talking with that soldier. And there was no press around. There was nothing he did this. There was no photo shot. But that really showed the character that he was. And so those are some stories that leading with love from President Bush that really stood out to me. So love the question, and there's other examples in the book. So thank you for that question. Are there any questions about, submarines or other stories about President Bush?
Any new submarines coming out?
Any new submarines coming out?
Any new class? What is the future like grown as to aircraft and submarine to going forward?
So submarines. One thing, and again, I don't know if you all know Admiral Rickover. Admiral Rickover was the father of the nuclear navy. What he did is he changed national security. And how he did that, he took the technology of the nuclear bomb when it was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he says, I want to take that technology and put it on submarines. Because he knew at the time, during World War II, the highest loss rate of any ship was a diesel submarine. They lost 1 in 5 diesel submarines in the entire fleet. So you had a 20% chance of dying on a submarine. And the reason why, because they were so vulnerable, because they'd have to come up and snorkel and recharge their batteries with the diesel generator, and they were very vulnerable to aircraft and radar on the surface. And he says, if I get a nuclear reactor on there where we don't have to come up and recharge the batteries with the diesel, because our nuclear reactor can power all our propulsion and electricity, he says, I could forever change nuclear, the strategic mission, and make us safer. And in 5 years, ironically, what he did, he took that technology and built the first submarine in 5 years, the USS Nautilus, and put it underneath the North Pole. But what was even more miraculous of that, he changed the culture. The culture at the Navy was at the time is don't ask questions, do what you're told, follow orders, take that hill, just like we have in the military, go do it. He knew that that culture of not critical thinking would not sustain the security and safety that was required for the nuclear power plants. And he knew that one reactor accident would totally, the nuclear program would have been totally done. And so what he did is that he changed that culture. And for 75 years, we've never had a reactor accident. And at the same bullet of fuel, that same fuel that's in those nuclear reactors is the same fuel that's in Chernobyl. Have you ever seen the documentary Chernobyl and the devastation? That uranium-235 bullets, those are the same bullets that are in the nuclear reactors. It's the same fuel that's in 3 Mile Island and Fukushima. And we have 20-year-old sailors operating these highly enriched nuclear reactors, and we've never had a reactor accident. But what was even more profound is if you look at the lives that were lost during World War I and World War II, it was about 40 and 70 million people, respectively. You know, I talked to a gentleman, I won't say his name, but he was in the Korean War. And he was talking about how he fought in the Korean War and Vietnam and so forth. And please don't, what I'm about to say, not take anything away from it. You are true heroes. But if you look at the number of people that died since World War II, it is minuscule. It is a small percentage. And why is that? The reason is because the advent of the nuclear bomb, the deterrence. I saw it on a ballistic missile submarine, and I saw it carrying the nuclear codes. The reason why there hasn't been a world war is because of the deterrence of the nuclear bomb. It saves lives now, but God only knows if we ever went and launched and escalated this, God forbid that, you know, what this world would be. And so the future of these submarines, which is the most survivable leg of the strategic triad, which is the ballistic missile submarine, which was created by Admiral Rickover, protects us. So we have the Columbia class coming out here in about 5 years. And that's the next generation to continue this great deterrence. And so submarines saves lives, even though they're really expensive. And one last story I'll tell you why submarines are so wonderful. When I was it's in the book, when I was at Millington, Tennessee as a detailer, and I won't go into why I was in Millington, Tennessee, but we got to tour FedEx plant. You know, FedEx is big hub in Tennessee and in Memphis. And so when I went there, it was amazing. It was something, you know, just like out of the movie Castaway. You know, it was like you see these planes just hovering, and then they would land. It'd be like a pit stop. And then all of a sudden, the crews would come in, take off the cargo and put new cargo in and fuel it up. And before you know it was taken off again. And no wonder why I understood why you can get a package overnight. And the founder of this wonderful organization was Fred Smith. And Fred Smith, if you ever Google, he was a Marine. And he had this idea after going to Yale that says the USPS program is just flawed. It's just not efficient. I'm going to create my own company. And the Yale professor says, you're crazy. And he gave him a C on the paper of his idea. But he did it anyways. And so he had such a great vision that he actually put everything in. And if you Google it, he went to Vegas because they were about to shut off the lights of his company. And he won at Vegas. And that was the only reason why FedEx continued. You can Google it. So he came in and he wanted a brief on submarine operations, aircraft, and Navy operations. So he was coming in. I studied up on him. I was just so honored to meet Fred Smith. And Fred Smith came in and he first got briefed by the Surface Navy. So they talked about the number of bases, all this other stuff. And when he finished, Fred Smith looks at him really sternly and he says, you guys. He goes, why is your littoral combat ship so far behind schedule and it so costs to overrun? You know, basically you're a disgrace to this country. And then he went to the joint fighter and it was the same thing. He says, why is a joint fighter this and so forth? And then I started to sweat. I'm like, what am I doing? What am I in here? And then he stands up and he says, you guys, he says, you're the reason why we have not gone to war with China. You're the reason why they haven't invaded Taiwan. And your Virginia class, under budget, under cost, on time, you're the role model for all others in acquisition. And he's completely right. There's no doubt in my mind that China has not invaded Taiwan because of submarines. And they can take out our aircraft carriers, they can take out our planes, but they can't take out our submarines. And this is why the submarines force with the nuclear reactors have really changed national security. So I think submarines are here, you know, and I don't know what the future is going to be, but I will tell you Putin is one scary person. I had a chance to meet Putin. Putin came to see President Bush in Kennebunkport, and President Bush and his father took him fishing, and I was in another boat with the football watching him, but it was still within earshot. You could hear him talking and people on the shore, and he didn't say a word. And all of a sudden, somebody from the shore in voice length says, President Putin, this is Anna from your hometown. Oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. And President Putin just looks up and just shakes his head at him. And then President Bush goes, great to see you, Anna, great to see you. He is stone cold, and the only way that's going to deter Putin is through strength. So that's why submarines are so important. So great question, thank you for that.
We have a few more questions.
Yes, two questions. Well, one, have you ever read the book or seen the movie On the Beach? The only surviving humans are on a submarine. There's an atomic war. It spreads throughout the world. Australia, New Zealand is the last livable area. And the cloud is coming down, and they send their last submarine out, with the last people on it. And about your generational comment, I'm 79 years old. My son went to school and graduated with you. He texted me something tonight, and he said, I think I grew up in the best of times and places with the best guidance.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And I couldn't agree with your sentiments. Who is your son?
Jeff Brown.
Yeah, Jeff. And she was the first female from Dunkirk to join the Navy Reserves. So really hats off to you, ma'am. And so, you know, it just reiterates that the greatest gift that I have is when I got several emails from people that said that you don't know me, but because of how you trained the people that were underneath you who trained me, I want to thank you profusely of how you led with love and you dramatically affected my life. And I tell them, it wasn't me. It was grooms that taught me in the professional world. And then I look back, and again, I cannot reiterate this more enough. It is the people in this room It wasn't me. I wouldn't be where I am if I wasn't grown up in the beautiful Bedford of Dunkirk, Fredonia. I know that. And so you have something really special here in Dunkirk, Fredonia. This is why I came back. There's nothing else I've ever experienced this camaraderie, this beautiful scenery, this great community. And so please know that you have the ability to really influence so many people by leading with love because you have the foundation. And it's just, if you take this book and I put it out, an actual how you can lead with love with tools and practical examples and awareness, please use this. And I can't do this alone. You all have the tools necessary. So I'm asking you, let's make this world better, a place together. And it all came from this wonderful generation and definitely beautiful community here in Dunkirk, Fredonia. So thank you so much for that wonderful comment.
Hey, Bob, I got a question for you. When you first started in the military, was there any military person like George Patton that influenced you or anything in your military life?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
During the time you first started in the military, was there any influence of military people that kind of older, like George Patton or something like that type thing?
So when I first started, I'll be completely honest with you, I joined the nuclear Navy because of Hunt for Red October and felt the camaraderie of going to see a submarine. And so just like everybody in this room, and again, I love the question, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. None. I joined the nuclear Navy, and if you read it, it was just by chance because it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And this is where that there are so many young people that they don't know what they want to do. And so what I think is so important is that we give them the tools. And as Mr. Rogers said, clearly, me joining the nuclear Navy and getting this thing, it wasn't my purpose in life. I think my purpose in life is really to share my experiences in leading with love. And as Mr. Rogers, I'll reiterate this, and Mr. Rogers has said, he says, God has put us on this earth for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to serve others. And when you find that service to others, it's a journey. It takes a journey. And I didn't have it right away because I clearly was asking, am I leading a good life? And once you find that euphoric feeling that you have, I get so much happiness sharing this lesson with so many people, so hopefully that they can lead a better life. And so I think that this message of leading a good life and finding your purpose, and again, that's why I keep on telling the teachers, you are the richest people in this world. What you have done for countless people and generations to come, just like Dan Palmer. How much, who knows? Like, the example of George Bailey, he says, I wish I would have never been born. And you see the impact if he was never born on the community. Well, we can't do this, but what happens if some of you teachers were never born? And if I wasn't born, would that sweet Caroline be here today? And if Dan Palmer wasn't here, we wouldn't have WDOE Player of the Day. And that WDO today, I guarantee you, it gave me confidence to go out there in the real world, to say, oh my gosh, maybe I am something. I was the WDOE Player of the Day, something so small. But that purpose in life, that is what I think, not only leading with love, but help this young generation find what is that purpose in life. So I think we'll have time for one more. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you, Captain Bob, for the presentation this evening. We sure enjoyed it. But my question is, how does the Navy get someone psyched up to get into the submarine service and live for days and months or weeks and months in that tube?
That is a great question. I think I had a good friend that I grew up or went through the nuclear Navy with. His name is Rob Goucher. Rob Goucher is now the 3-star admiral in charge of the entire Atlantic and Pacific fleet. And we had dinner. And I told him this. I said, Rob, I said, if you want to be a legendary leader, it's not going to be about how many submarines you get out on time and what you do. Of course, if we went to war in Nimitz, that's a different story, but that we're not there. I said, if you want to be a legendary leader and you really want to make an impact on our national security, then you lead with love. You value the team members. And I said, if you look at the legendary leaders on our submarine force, it's grooms. In the book, I talk about this sailor, Big Al the sailor's pal. Everyone knows Big Al the sailor's pal. Everyone knows grooms. And why do they know him? Is because they make people feel valued. And so I think in any organization is applicable. You know, you will do anything for a leader that makes you feel valued. And so if you can make the submarine force feel valued and have purpose, you're not going to have problems with retention. It's going to be a field of dreams model. And so, yes, it's hard, but the reason why I went into the submarine force to begin with is because when I toured that submarine in Norfolk, when I was going there just to have a good time, and I said to my friend, you read it in the book, there's no way I'm joining the nuclear Navy. And the thing that changed my decision was when I went on that submarine and I saw that camaraderie, that value, that purpose, the same feeling that I get when I come to Dunkirk and Fredonia, and feeling valued because you're around people who love you, that was the reason why I joined the nuclear Navy. So that will overcome anything. Yes, spending 8 years of my life underwater, it was tough. There were times when, missing birthdays, going underneath the North Pole, not knowing my daughter Sophia, how her eye surgery went, going underneath anesthesia for the first time when she's 4 years old. Yeah, it was tough. But one of the things I talk about in the book is that we took 2 beers for each sailor up to the North Pole. And I made it, again, we looked at regulations and so forth. We're skirting the thing. We treated the ice as land. But I told the crew members, I said, you don't get paid hardly enough for doing what you're doing. The sacrifices you are making for national security, your family, and our country are just unimaginable. This is why I want to treat you with 2 beers. No one could even imagine of having a beer at the North Pole on a nuclear submarine. I did that because I wanted to make them feel valued. And that is one of the contributing factors of why we had the highest retention in the Pacific Fleet for 2 consecutive years in a row. So yes, it is a tough life, and I think with this generation it's going to be tougher, but if they continue using the same playbook, and if you lose, war fighting and saber rattling, they're going to be really hurting as far as mission success because they're not concentrating on the people. So thank you for that question. One more question, and then we'll go.
So I want to end it on a kind of a lighter note. In the book, you reference Mike Murphy, and I am very familiar with his story. Have you ever completed the MRF?
So if you could tell me, the answer is no, because it's.
So then I challenge you.
I will. I'll do it.
I've done it 3 times.
So Denny and Joe are just wonderful people. And Joe is, I'll never forget, just a quick story. Joe was on the track team with Bogaerts and Dudzik. And Joe would take me underneath his wing, and we would do the shot put and discus. And Joe just took care of me, and I'll never forget it. And Joe is leading a great life because he cared for me so much. And so I just want to reiterate this. Joe is legendary to me, but here's this guy, Michael Murphy. If you don't know him, he is known throughout the world of doing MRFs. If you go to any CrossFit
gym.
Yeah, he is legendary. Let's go do a MRF. And that's the guy that was on that screen. And why is he legendary? Why is he so legendary? Because he led with love. He sacrificed his own life to give that to someone else. And, you know, we talk about in religion, if you really want to love somebody, you sacrifice yourself for the benefit of others. That's why he's legendary. So I will definitely take this challenge of the Murph. It is tough. What is, I forgot what it was.
You run a mile, then 300 pull, no wait, we end with, I don't remember the whole consecutive, but it's 100, 200, 300, 300 squats, 200 push-ups, and 100 pull-ups. And then you end, with a mile run.
Yeah.
Do you still want to
Bob, you are younger than I. I have done it 3 times. I will not run anymore. They do modifications.
Okay.
There are modifications. So I challenge you. It's done during Memorial Day, and I challenge you to come back to Dunkirk.
I got to check my schedule.
Stephanie, is he free next Memorial Day?
So I really appreciate this, and I really, really, I love you all, and you have really molded me on who I have become. And if you read the book, it really shows that I couldn't done this without you. There's no doubt I would have not been where I am today if I didn't have the mentorship, the caring of classmates and teachers. There is no doubt in my mind is that you have influenced my life so much that I have impacted others. So by you doing what you did, you have brought a life into this world because how you treated me leading with love. So I just want to say thank you to all of you that are here, and I love you, I care for you, and it's so honored to be part of Dunkirk Fredonia, and just thank you for coming.
All right, so that concludes the program. If you received a ticket, we are going down to Coughlin's, and that ticket is good for 1 beer on Bob. All right, so Bob is buying beers. All right, thank you.
Oh, boy.